Today's episode, we have Marvin Tolliver. Marvin, they, is a licensed clinical social worker who was born and raised in East Oakland, California, and currently lives in Philadelphia, where he serves as a therapist at Radical Therapy Center. He's the co-founder of the mental health collective Melanated Social Work, and Marvin is a queer, bisexual, Black creator, writer, consultant, public speaker. Check out his TEDx if you haven't, by the way. He's a mentor, he's a wedding officiant, and he's a radical educator. He encourages others to see the power within themselves and use their voice to fight for justice. And we have a wonderful topic today where we're going to be delving into Black masculinity and belonging. Let's get into it today with Marvin. World, I am excited to introduce Marvin Tolliver on today's episode. Marvin, thank you so much for being here. I'm thrilled to have you here. When I first came across your story, it was actually through an Instagram live that you were doing. And it popped up on my phone and I said, oh, what is this? What is this? I need to check this out. It was just a sense that I had. And I got on there and you were on IG Live doing what I came to find out later, some you do weekly, and Ask Me Anything. And I think you were pouring yourself a drink and chilling and relaxing, and you were sharing, it was like a Q&A basically for whoever was on there, just like it says, Ask Me Anything, about, at that particular time, it was as your experiences as a licensed clinical social worker.
Mhm.
And so, oh, well, I'm a licensed counselor. You're a licensed clinical social worker. So immediately I was like, oh, I want to hear what kind of questions people ask mental health therapist. And so that initially caught my attention, but then your energy and your spirit is what kept me on there. It really wouldn't have mattered to me what people were asking. I just wanted to hear more from you. And I know that if that's the experience I'm having, that other people have that experience of you as well. So of course I started, Google stalking you, and I said, I want to learn more. I want to learn more. And I went and watched your TEDx. And when I heard your story on TEDx, I knew why your energy was so captivating to me, like why I felt drawn to you. Your story started to line up with what I was feeling from you, which was someone who has a wealth of knowledge, someone who has really done the work of digging into themselves, and someone who has beyond just a singular story to share, but is able to speak to your experience that is part of a collective. And that really resonated deeply with me, even though we come from different spaces. Feeling part of something bigger than your own story was something that many of us, I think, can connect with.
Mm.
So, for that, I thank you for putting yourself out there, sharing yourself with the world in the ways that you have, and for being here with us today.
Thank you. What an introduction. Like, I'm like tearing up like, okay, well, that was not my intention, but this is lovely. No, yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. As influencers, a lot of the time we put out so much just content or information or IG lives, and sometimes we don't get that kind of feedback,
Mm,
and some every once in a while people will sprinkle in some messages or something like thank you for your content, but
mhm.
we don't get it enough, so I thank you for that.
Well,
Yeah.
look, we're gonna delve right into it because we want to hear more from you. So today, when I met with you initially to talk about what we could delve into today, um, what really seemed to resonate with both of us was Black masculinity and how that ties into belonging. And so, if we could just start out with just very basic in terms, well, it's never very basic when we're talking about this particular topic, but in terms of identities, but just sharing what are your identities in general that really you're most connected with right now?
Yeah, so I am Black African American. That is what people see when they first see me. That's what I was raised as. That's what I was told to be very proud of. So first, I am a black man. Um, Second, I identify as queer, so I'm a bisexual black man as well. That's something that, as we'll talk about,
Mhm.
I wasn't always very proud of, and I wasn't always
Mm.
very open about, and that was something that I tried to hide a lot. But now I can say it very openly, very proudly, and without like anxiety, kind of over my head. Third, I do identify, but I'm HIV positive. So I was diagnosed in 2015, um, in grad school. And so that was also a part of myself that I was like, "Oh, no one's ever going to know about this." But then, as I kind of went through my journey, it I'm not going to say it's a diagnosis that has brought strength, but I think, we can definitely change our narratives. Right, like, we can change our narratives, around different things, and I think
Mhm.
that was something I it took a long time to do for me, but that was something that I did, and now it's like, "Oh, I'm still enough, like, I'm still lovable, I'm still me," I
Mhm.
just have this diagnosis, and that, is because of a lot of other things that happened in life, but something that I once found, a lot of shame and a lot of guilt around, I now see as something that, is a much bigger, um we have more conversations to have around it, and
Mhm.
kind of how I got there. So all that to say, so I'm a black man, I'm
Yeah.
bisexual, and I identify, and I am HIV positive. I also,
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't an identity, but I think it's part of who I am. Is I'm a connector, and I'm also a movement worker.
Yes, and I mean, the things that are a part of who we are that we identify with do become parts of our identity. I mean, the parts of us that we feel connected with become a part of our identity.
Right.
And when you talk about Marvin, you know, being Black, being a Black man, and those 2 specific things being something that you really felt proud of and had pride instilled in you around those identities, and then having this other part of you that's HIV positive and queer identifying, being bisexual, and having the complete opposite internal experience around that, the opposite of pride, which
Yeah.
oftentimes is shame.
Yeah.
Tell us, Marvin, about how those different parts of yourself came to at odds with one another and how they kind of came to a collision.
So in the black community, and I'm not gonna say, and I actually I'm not gonna say the black community. I'm gonna say, um, where I was raised, and how I was raised as Marvin in my community. I think
Mhm.
there's this idea that the black community is a monolith, like every one of us is the same, and it
Right.
obviously completely not true. So I'm gonna try and stay away from like the black community. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
but in my community, I grew up in Oakland, California, in the 90s and the early 2000s, and being like there were many black people there. Now because of gentrification, it's changing a bit. But when I was growing up, there was lots of black folks.
Mhm.
My middle school, my elementary school, my high school, my neighborhood, very diverse, but a very good number of black folks. And that was something that I always loved, right? I love the diversity. I loved being around black folks. There's a pretty big Mexican population in Oakland as well, especially where I went to high school in the Fruitvale area. So loved it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, as far as anything outside of heterosexual, that was not so acceptable.
Mm.
So there were times. I mean, it's homophobia is, I'll say, was anyway, ubiquitous, right? Like it
Right.
was everywhere. So it was
Right.
in media, it was in the music that I was listening to, and I love hip hop, but the number of times that they, said very homophobic things,
Mhm.
it's a lot. In sports, and I
Mm.
love sports, and I didn't play football, because I was afraid that in the locker room I would see another boy and get excited and
Mhm. Mhm.
and be kind of like found out. And
Right.
that's like one of the biggest fears, I think, for a lot of men, especially black men who are hiding their identities, is being found out. Because again, we're told either directly or indirectly through media, through whatever societal, kind of perspective, that homosexuality is wrong, queerness is wrong, anything outside of heterosexuality is wrong. I also grew up in the church, and
Mhm.
I went to Allen Temple Baptist Church, and that was a thing that we were taught was bad. And so it's like, well, society is telling me I'm wrong. My parents or my dad would, make little kind of jokes about gay folks that we would see. Um, sports culture, wasn't really inclusive or accepting of queerness. And now, like, I'm gonna go to hell. So now it's like, oh, I, I, I have to separate myself however I can. And so it was very much trying to pray the gay away, when I was going to church. It was very much trying to um, almost like force myself at times to not look at men or boys that way. So yeah, there was a very um, intense internal conflict,
Mhm.
and one that almost led me to in middle school, like taking my life.
Mm.
And it was a really, I mean, there were other things going on, and then I think the biggest thing was like, and I don't have this, and there's this part of me that I can't change,
Mhm.
right? And so, that was something, um, again, that created such internal, not even conflict, I would say chaos,
Mhm.
internal chaos around like, there's like me and who I am, and then there's this idea of who I'm supposed to be,
Mhm.
and striving so hard to be this idea of who I'm supposed to be. And this person got good grades. This person was masculine and straight. This person didn't get in trouble. This person, could get along with everyone. So just kind of a chameleon as far as like people, just because I didn't like conflict either, so I was conflict avoidant.
Mm.
So it very much a people pleaser, and also some of that came from fear of being found out about my sexuality. So all of these
Mhm.
different kind of hats and identities around, like, kind of centering who I thought I was supposed to be,
Yeah.
um, and I think I ended up not even knowing who I really was.
Oh, yeah, because you get lost in the bullshit of it. I mean, you get lost
Right.
in the performance, right?
Right.
And I'm also hearing from you, Marvin, that there's, like, these parallel lives that are moving almost in tandem, right?
Mhm.
Like, there's community in the many people describe church as a place of community. And also there's kind of feeling exiled, silently exiled
Mhm.
without even actively being exiled while still being there.
Right.
There's there's family, there's that interpersonal relationship with your father, right? And also hearing the messaging that you're not accepted without his even knowing that he's rejecting you, but you know that. And then there's also this, um, this love for things that you're having to keep yourself from, like football, for example. So having to exclude your own self because of what you're anticipating will happen. So with that is a fragmented sense of self. And in the research that I've done on bicultural identity integration, when we look at I'll use myself as an example, my Egyptian self and my American self, the more fragmented those parts of me are, the more uh, psychological dis-ease I experience. the
Mhm.
more environmental dis-ease I experience,
Mhm.
the more
Mhm.
I feel like I am not a whole person because only parts of me are showing up.
Right.
And so being able to integrate those two aspects of myself, which shows up in many ways, has been one of the most powerful things. And in the research I've done, that's been true for people, regardless of what those identities, those fragmented identities are.
Mhm.
One of the things that I heard you say was being straight and masculine, almost like you put those two together, like they're conflated.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I'm curious about what your definition of masculinity was back then.
So my definition of masculinity came from watching my dad. Um, I also did martial arts when I was growing up. And so there were very strong black men, both physically, mentally strong. And I think that's where I got another idea of how I was supposed to show up. And so very, physically, very tough. Also, I was in Oakland, California. And so, if you're walking down the street, you have to be tough. Um, um, Heterosexual, obviously. And not only heterosexual, but having multiple girlfriends, right? Like having like being this kind of ladies man. So that was another piece that was difficult for me because from my experience, which I had none,
Mhm.
I that's the one I didn't have any experience. So then when I'm like, okay, I kind of like this girl, but I have no idea what to do. And so now I'm just ignorantly, nervously trying to do something that makes sense. Um, and in the end, I would feel rejected because I wouldn't get kind of what I wanted, which was mutual attraction, or maybe things didn't move as fast as I wanted, or maybe I was nervous, and so I didn't take any action, and so the other person um, went somewhere else. But I think, that kind of tied into masculinity for me. Sports was a big part of it. So playing basketball, baseball, football. I think in those three specifically were the I guess the more masculine sports growing up, especially in the black community. Um, and then I actually played volleyball in high school. And volleyball was not seen as a masculine sport. Even though like anywhere else in the world. It's just a sport that people play. But at that time, like volleyball was what the girls played.
Mhm,
And so then I
mhm,
was playing that. Right. And so there were so many things that kind of had me question um myself and my own masculinity. But like I knew I didn't fit into this I guess societal kind of view of black masculinity. Not 100%. Like some of the stuff I
mhm,
was like, I can get with that. And other things I'm like, this isn't me.
mhm,
And so it was very difficult to then say, am I not masculine now? Because I
mm,
because I don't check every single one of these boxes. Right. And
mhm,
so that was, it was again trying to be quote unquote masculine, this performance, while at the
mhm,
same time trying to figure out like who is Marvin? Who am I?
mm. And so what specifically made those things Black masculine?
I went to San Diego State for my undergrad, and at the time, it's a huge school. It's about 40,000 students, and at the time, I want to say it was 70 something percent white. And this was new to me. I had never gone to an environment where there was a majority white people. I was just like, "Oh, this is different."
That's different. That's different for sure.
This is
Yeah.
different. I realized that, like, the white men, they had different rules around masculinity.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was much more fluid.
It was much more fluid.
Yeah.
Pray pray do tell.
I mean, when at frat parties and just regular
Yeah.
parties, and men are like hugging each other, and sometimes doing very strange things when people fall asleep. I'm not gonna get into it.
Mhm, mhm.
um, with body parts, with nudity, with a lot of
Yeah,
things. It was just like, this is different, but y'all are just like living. Like, is
the rules
there's
weren't the same.
right. The rules weren't the same. And so there was no like, oh, he's gay or he's a faggot, blah, blah, blah. It was just like we're just laughing and enjoying ourselves.
Right, and more freedom is what it sounds like.
I said, "Oh, this is like I'm not gonna do this because I'm trying to pretend to protect my masculinity, but I'm witnessing this other, to your point, freedom, kind of freedom of expression, um, this a different level, really a different level of intimacy in some ways as well."
Compared to what you had experienced.
Right, especially among my black male friends. It was very eye-opening, it was shocking, it was a little strange at times,
Mm,
but it was for sure
mhm.
different.
It's interesting because when I speak with white men, I don't know that there's an awareness that there's that kind of freedom. What I've heard from white men is that they don't necessarily feel a sense of community in their own white male spaces, that
Hmm,
there's not that intimacy. And they look at
hmm,
black men and believe, I wish there could be that kind of intimacy. It's like a different kind almost.
mm.
It's like a different kind. It's
Yeah,
like there's more freedom with identities oftentimes in white male spaces, but there's almost like more emotional bonding in black male spaces.
hmm.
That's the perception at least. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts were on that.
I guess I'm curious around the word bonding, because there are certain things that we do bond over, right? And that makes sense. But are we bonding over these things because we actually like them, or are we just supposed to bond over these things because that's what black men do, right? Like
Mhm.
football. There are so many men that have no idea,
Yeah.
so many black men that have
Yeah.
no idea what the rules of football are, but
Yep.
will sit and watch and cheer and do all of those things because that's what we've been taught to do.
And, like, looking for cues from one another in that way.
A lot of men in general, but a lot of black men really enjoy strip clubs. And again, like, there's so many men that do not like strip clubs, right? But it's naked women dancing in front of you and you throwing money at them. How could you, as a heterosexual man, not like a strip club? Right. And so it's like, and so sure, like we do bond over some things, but I guess I would question, what are these things that we're bonding over? And I don't want to make it sound like
Again.
it's all a performance. There are definitely things that we
Yeah.
actually do bond over as well.
Right.
Food,
Right.
obviously. There's music. There's ideals. There's a lot of different things that we genuinely do bond over. That's not rooted in kind of the sense of pretending. But I always question, is it an authentic bond, or are you
Mhm.
bonding over something that you're quote unquote supposed to be bonding over?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure that a lot of the more genuine bonding is likely oftentimes over shared lived experiences in terms of, oppression
Right.
and and just a knowing, right? Not even necessarily have to naming, but having a knowing there. But it's interesting the perceptions, and that's why I bring that up because, uh, to break down some of those myths. One of the things that really struck me when I was listening to your TEDx was that day that you got that HIV result,
Yeah.
and specifically the days leading up to it. If you could share a little bit about where your mindset was, because I know you were in graduate school at the time, which I
Mhm.
can speak to how that has its own experience because I went to a predominantly white institution. I went to a historically white institution. So it had been there for a long time.
Yeah.
And so that even comes with its challenges. But you were moving through that space in your life in terms of being in graduate school to become a licensed mental health clinician
Yeah.
as this is coming up.
Grad school was probably the 2 most difficult years of my life, um, for multiple reasons, and school was not the biggest one. But yeah, so, at that time, I had just got into a relationship with a woman. Um, I was going to Boston College to get my, MSW, and, again, I'm from Oakland, and so during the summers, I would go back home for a couple of months just to visit friends and family and then come back during the year. And before I, left, I said, "Well, let me just get tested just because before this relationship, I was still, out here in these streets." And,
Mhm.
um, so let me make sure everything is good. Yeah, and most times that I had gone, everything was good, so I wasn't really worried. And so I get to, get back to Oakland, and they call me, and they're like, "We need you to come in." They
Mhm.
never asked me to come in. Never. Never, never, never. They've never asked me to come in. And I'm like, "Well, I can't come in because I'm in California right now. So, can you just tell me?" And they're like, "Okay, well, we're gonna call you back. We're gonna have the doctor call you back." And I was just like, "Shit." Sorry, can I curse on
Oh, yeah.
here? um, and I said, so it maybe was probably was about an hour in between those calls. And so the anxiety was
Wow.
through the roof. So I was like, "You know what? It's probably fine. Like, it's probably nothing. It's probably okay." And I'm like, "Why did they ask me to come in though? How come she couldn't just tell me though? How come, so like the anxiety for that entire hour, however long it was just like it was back and forth in my brain. So doctor calls me. I'm home alone, by the way, and for whatever reason, both of my parents were gone, and that never happens. Like my either one of them is usually always home, but both of them were gone for whatever reason. And doctor calls me back, and he's like, he said, "Well, your HIV results were abnormal," and I was just like, "Okay, like what?
Mm.
I don't like. What does this
Mhm.
mean? You like say what you want to say," and he's like, "Well, yeah, your HIV results were abnormal." And he was kind of dancing around it. And I was just like, "Is he like what is he saying?" And so I asked, "Okay, so out of the individuals who have these abnormal results, how many actually test positive for HIV?" And he said something like 98%. And I just collapsed on the floor and just cried, just like cried and cried. And my mom actually had just pulled up. Like I don't know if this was a creator, divine intervention, ancestors, whatever you want to call it, but my mom had just pulled up. And she just saw me on the floor sobbing, and she's just like, "What's going on? What's going on?" And she like comes down and she wraps her arms around me, and I'm just like, "I have HIV." And so she's like
Mm.
crying and I'm crying. The poor doctor's on the phone. He's probably he's like
Oh, the
witnessing
doctor's
this
still on
entire
the phone.
ordeal.
Oh.
I can laugh about it
Oh,
now.
they made
Um
sure they were sending her right in time.
he says, "I'm so sorry, and we'll give you a call back later to kind of talk through next steps." He said it might be a false positive, and so get another opinion. Um, yeah. So then we got off the phone. Mom's holding me and hugging me, and I remember saying, "I tried to do everything right,"
Mm.
and I was like reflecting on like why did I say that? Like what was the point of that? And it was again this version of myself who I thought I was supposed to be, this perfect person, right? Versus this real version of me who's had this internal chaos happening, right? And now, and you mentioned the word integration, now it was almost forced integration,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
that itself was really scary and uncomfortable for me too,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
the other part of it is, oh shit, now I have to tell people how I got this and who I got this from, right? And so that was like another layer of just like, oh, my world is about to crumble. um,
Yeah.
and so that was really, definitely an intense moment. And I think the a lot of folks don't know the after even after that diagnosis, um, I wasn't officially diagnosed until maybe 2 months later because I went to one place and they were
Wow.
like, okay, well, it could be a false positive or it could not. So I'm like, okay, went to another place and she's just like, well, very well could have HIV, but also like maybe not. I'm just like,
Holy
what is happening?
shit.
And so then
That took
finally,
that 1 hour and stretched it out for 2 months.
right. And
Jeez.
I'm at home, I'm trying to hang out with friends. I had a trip to Vegas with my friends and I like didn't feel right telling them. So I'm like trying to enjoy myself in Vegas with my friends while also holding on to this and they don't know. And so it's just this really heavy, heavy thing that's happening for me. So finally I get back to Boston. I go to Brigham and Women's Hospital and they tested me and, it's very soft-spoken white doctor. He was amazing. I really appreciated him. But he's just like, "Yeah, you have HIV." And I said, "Thank you." Like, "Thank you for like," because after a while, it's just like, I just don't wanna have this, maybe I have it, maybe I don't anymore. So he told me, luckily they caught it fairly early. And so after, probably a month or so of being on, my antiviral,
Yeah.
meds, I was undetectable, and that's kind of the
Oh,
best case
wow.
scenario for folks living with HIV is becoming undetectable, which means that
Wow.
there's so little of the virus, in your system that it can't be detected by, the machines that they have.
That is the best case scenario, and you followed your instinct to go and get tested regularly.
Yeah.
And also, there was a whole life that you were leading up until that point that was that parallel living that we were talking about earlier
Yeah.
in terms of how you were showing up in one world, except part of that internal world had now become externalized, and so you're living really two lives. And when you said forced integration in that moment when your mom was on the floor with you and the doctor's on the phone, that is taking agency away from it being really on your terms.
Mhm.
Most of the time when we're talking about identity integration, it's on the person's terms of how much they want to bring forth of what. They get to choose what they're bringing forth, when they're bringing it forth, how they're going to integrate it. I use a very, very like small example of, I started some of my integration by serving Egyptian food to my American friends. That was like, but
Mm.
it was on my terms of what I was gonna serve and to whom I was gonna serve and when I was gonna serve.
Right.
S In this case, obviously much more is at stake, but it's it's so much that's coming forth
Mhm.
and not really by your own choosing.
I mean, and I could have chosen to say like I got it from a woman, but and I think this is where I did have a bit of agency of like, you know what? Let's let's stop. Like let's stop the lying. Let's stop the pretending. Like it had been exhausting up until that point, and it would only continue being more exhausting if I tried to continue lying. Like let's just put it all on the table. And because no one knew I or No, I thought anyway. No, no one knew that I was bisexual either, right? And so then there's that piece of like, well, I have to come out to people or allow people in.
How did the lying, um, create barriers to your own sense of belonging?
It was safer to pretend, to stay there. There was safety in silence. There was safety in just going along with whatever people thought, because or my belief was that if I was truthful around who I really was, people would abandon me. People would reject me. People would abandon me. I mean, there was various shows, around folks coming out to their parents and then being like, okay, well, you don't live here anymore. Get out. And, friends saying like, oh, you do that, or you're attracted to that. Can't really mess with you anymore. I'm sorry. Right. And so like there was
Mhm,
this fear that the folks who were the closest to me would leave me and I would
mhm.
just be left with nothing and no one.
And also the paradox there is that the folks who were closest with you could only get so close to all of you. And so again, it's that parallel life of feeling connection on the one hand, that one part of you, that one parallel is feeling connection, and then the other part is isolated.
Because people have said they love me and showed me love, but this is one of those make or break kind of things for some folks and some families. And so like, okay, you do love me, but how much do you actually love me? Are you going to love
Mhm.
all of me, or are you just loving those parts that you find are lovable? And then I think some other parts of myself are not lovable.
Mhm. And we know from Maslow's hierarchy of needs that love and belonging kind of go hand in hand, and a lot of people
Mhm.
don't understand the connection between the 2.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so the parts of you that you could bring forward that you did feel like belonged, where you did feel seen and embraced, possibly celebrated, I don't know. But the parts of you that were seen and embraced at the very least, you felt loved because there was belonging there.
Right.
But the parts of you that you could not show or you did not feel safe showing because safety is a precursor to belonging,
Mhm.
that that part of you was isolated and therefore could not even have the opportunity to be loved.
Mhm.
And you couldn't
Yeah.
present it that way because it didn't feel safe in
Yeah.
your mind. Yeah. And possibly quite realistically, right?
Yeah.
As we move more into like modern masculinity and we incorporate being a Black man, those parts of you that you've always felt that deep connection with, when we look at Black modern masculinity, what does that mean to you now, Marvin?
That's a good question, and I love that question because it's whatever we want it to be.
Mhm. That's powerful in itself, right? Like,
Right.
it's what I say it's gonna be. It's
It's
what it
what I
means for
say it is.
you.
Yeah. Also just learning more about the influential queer leaders in movement work. James Baldwin, um, I believe Audre Lorde was queer as well. Um, there's just so many queer icons.
Jennifer Mullen,
Yes,
yes.
yes. She's just a beautiful human. I started just questioning, right? So I think that was one of those things after my diagnosis, after I started therapy, is like I started just questioning, like, why is this way? Like, why did I have so much pressure on myself to be this one way? Who decided that this is what Black masculinity looked like?
Yes.
And so you do more research and you peel back the layers and you start to much better understand how white supremacy plays a role, how Christianity plays a role, especially as when it influences America and sexuality in America. Um, you think of, or I started to learn more about African and indigenous nations before colonialism, and how there were multiple genders, and how there were some nations and cultures that didn't even assign a gender until they knew the energy and the spirit of the young person. Right. And so then it's just like, oh, like we're following a playbook that wasn't even meant for us. It was forced on us. And so that really opened my eyes. Listening to other so there's an influencer activist, I also think they're a comedian, named Alok, Alok, and they had an interview, and uh they said something that just like blew my mind. They said, I'm saying that there are as many ways to be masculine that there are men on the planet.
Mhm.
And I said, whoa. That like I was just like, yes. Yes,
Yes.
there's not this little box of how you're supposed to be masculine, and now there's like the masculinity police of saying like you're not masculine enough, like do different right? Like masculinity looks different, and it can look different, and it's supposed to look different because we're not all the same.
Right, and there's no cookie cutter way, and the cookie cutter way is who's making the dough and who's cutting the cookies and who's baking them, and it's you gotta get in the kitchen. Like, I mean, I don't mean that I probably
Right.
shouldn't say it like that, but it's like you get to make your own recipe of who you are, and you get to decide what ingredients make you who you are, and the people who have the greatest irony here is that so much of Black masculinity in the United States has been dictated by white het cis patriarchal values.
Yes.
What kind of mind fuck is that? You know what I mean? It's just like,
Yeah.
how how did that happen? Yeah, we
Yeah.
obviously, there's a history there, but that's what's so fascinating about it, and it's like, but is that who you really want to be? And even more so, is that who you even are?
Right.
You know, and that's where, the integration happens of like taking what you want. Maybe there are some values that align with you. I don't know. Maybe they're not, but you get to decide that and you have agency over that.
There is, an entire like culture, like subculture of black and brown men who have sex with men. And like this down low DL culture, like still alive and well today as I speak.
Very much alive and well today.
And these men, some of them have girlfriends, some of them have wives, some of them, identify as heterosexual on the outside, but then they secretly have sex with men. What's really sad is that a lot of folks in our society are more concerned with the same sex, relations rather than the like coercion and the manipulation and the sexual
Right.
assault and the sexual abuse. Like
Right.
that is to the wayside, but oh no, this person is queer. Like that is what you're focusing on? So it you know, it,
Is
it
is it that deep, folks?
yeah, for a lot of people it is. For a lot of black, especially black and brown boys and men, it actually is.
And it's
And
dangerous.
it
It's
is,
dangerous. I mean, listen to what you were saying about being in middle school. It
right?
is dangerous. It's literally killing people, and I know we keep saying this over and over these days, but it can't be overstated.
People are taking their own lives. People are killing queer folks. The what's O'Shea Sibley was voguing and dancing to Beyonce and was murdered. Children, queer youth
Mhm.
are completing suicide,
Mhm.
right? So it's not just folks doing it to themselves because they feel like they're not wanted or not, don't have a sense of belonging, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
But there's other people, there are entire governments, right, trying to end the existence and the joy and just acknowledging that queer folks and trans folks exist.
Yeah, I live in the state of North Carolina, and, we were the ones who were known for the bathroom bill that was going on a few years ago. It's just it's outrageous. but this is what's happening. And it's creating barriers to belonging, not just for people within their own bodies, with themselves, but in interpersonal relationships. People are feeling ousted from communities, like we talked about, and also just feeling like not being a part of this world, like I don't belong in this world. Those are the four primary spaces of belonging that I've identified: the self, interpersonal, community, and universal. And when people are feeling ousted from all of those spaces, that becomes very dangerous for an individual, because it's like, well, then where do I belong? I have not even one space. It's like with children, we say they only need one stable parent, Same thing with belonging. We got to start with one space where it's safe. So there's so much. I feel like we need a part 2 to this, honestly. I feel like we could really pick up a part 2 to this. Last question that I want to ask you, the question I ask everybody, it's our guiding question at the end of every episode. It's guiding, but it's also at the end, is what does belonging mean to you?
Can I say something very quickly before I answer that? Because
Yeah.
I know you brought up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that was actually stolen from
Mhm.
indigenous
Yeah.
folks.
Yeah.
The
The
Blackfoot
Blackfoot
First
community.
Nation, yeah.
Yeah.
So they
Mhm.
have the inverse, and where self-actualization and community is at the
Mhm.
base, and
Mhm.
is the most important thing. And so, which
Mhm.
actually comes to, is a good segue to your question, because belonging, like, that is how important it is, right?
Mhm.
That, like, if you have belonging, and I even think about like physiological needs, but if you're part of community, those needs will be met,
Mhm.
right? Because these folks care about you, you care about them, your humanities are tied to each other, your livelihoods are tied to each other. And so we eat together,
Mhm.
right? You don't
Mhm.
starve. That's not a thing.
Right.
We eat together. If you don't have something, I'm going to provide it for you, and
Yeah.
vice versa. You know how in romantic relationships, if you've been together for a long time, and then they break up, it's almost like that person is a piece of you. I think belonging is you are a piece, like someone else's spirit, their soul, their humanity actually becomes part of you, and yours becomes part of them. And so I think it's more than just kind of what we see here in the physical, like of like calling or texting or hanging out. Like that's obviously part of it. But I think that on a deeper spiritual level, people are now like a part of you, right? Like they're part of your existence. They make up a part of you and who you are.
It's like
Um,
interpersonal integration.
yeah. Yes.
You your energies have now become interconnected.
Right. Or almost intertwined, right? And it will take a very long time to undo it, right?
That doesn't just
Because the connection
unravel.
is so strong.
I love that, because you know what? It makes me think of breakups, suppose, and I'm gonna put breakups in quotes, right?
Yeah.
When you have a romantic partnership and you're broken up, but you still feel intertwined with that person, even if you're not talking anymore, if you're not seeing each other, even if you're not communicating in the more traditional ways, maybe intrapsychically you are in some way. That is beautiful, Marvin. That is beautiful. Thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate you so much. I'm so honored that you would take the time to be with us. I know you're a busy person. We're going to share all your socials. Um, and then I'd love to invite you at some point for a part 2. We might have to pick this back up, but thank you
Yeah.
again. I appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. Love what you're doing, and yeah, it's just belonging is so important to our existence. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Thanks, Marvin.